Welcome to the Debka File, a weekly roundup of exclusive news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East, broadcast to you live from the heart of the region. Coming up on the program today, new Gaza flare-up 3 days after Hamas declared truce. Following Gaza clash, Iran poised for Quneitra operation. Khamenei appoints new air defense chief for Iran. Will Turkey get the new U.S. F-35 stealth fighter jet? And now to our top headlines. On Saturday, Gaza Palestinians violated their own ceasefire, launching a barrage of small volleys at Israel. Twin rocket volleys hit Sderot, the Eshkol district, the Hof Ashkelon Council, and She'ar HaNegev. The Iron Dome blocked 4 of them. Israel retaliated with airstrikes against 10 Hamas military targets, followed by 5 targets on Sunday. Most hit factories that stored weapons and the Hamas naval compound on the Gaza shore. After the Palestinians issued a ceasefire, the Israeli government replied that Israel will meet nonviolence in kind. Even the highest level of the Israeli military is not in control of Gaza flare-ups or ceasefires, as those decisions are in the hands of the head chiefs of Palestinian terrorist organizations, Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The Palestinian ceasefire applied only to rocket and mortar fire. Meanwhile, the violent assaults on the border fence, the bottle bombs, and the flaming kites that are destroying thousands of acres of Israeli farmland continue. Debka File reports that the Palestinian terror campaign has been designed by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Al-Quds brigades, and the Lebanese Hezbollah. Israel's leaders have not come up with a method to halt the Palestinian terror, which emanates from the Gaza Strip. A Kuwait-drafted UN Security Council resolution that condemned Israel's use of force against Palestinian civilians was viewed by the U.S. as one-sided, failing to blame Hamas for the recent surge of violence. U.S. Ambassador to the UN had this to say about the resolution.
The resolution offered by Kuwait represents a grossly one-sided view of what has taken place in Gaza in recent weeks. Anyone who cares about the peace process should vote against it. But make no mistake, regardless of how others choose to vote, the United States will oppose this resolution and we will veto it if we must. The terrorist group Hamas bears primary responsibility for the awful living conditions in Gaza.
Danny Danon, Israel's representative to the UN, stated the following.
It recognized that peace and stability will never come to our region until the international community is brave enough to call out the terrorists by name. We thank the Americans for taking the right stand. Ambassador Haley, you made clear today that the rules of the game are changing here in this council, and this double standard against Israel will not stand. When Paris was attacked by ISIS, the international community stood with Paris. But when Israel is attacked by Hamas, you blame us, the victim. There is no difference between the evil of Hamas and the barbarity of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or Boko Haram. These organizations do not distinguish in their mission to terrorize innocent people. They are all the same. The only resolution this council should pass is one that condemns Hamas and designates it a terrorist organization.
Debka File military experts propose that the IDF takes the following steps to counter the Hamas terror that has escalated over the past 3 months. First, the IDF should incorporate surprise attacks and should not boast about its restraint in the face of Palestinian attacks. Hamas views this as a sign of weakness. The IDF should adopt a proactive policy that distinguishes between the threat from Gaza and distressed population. The territory's humanitarian crisis should not be addressed as a way to solve the numerous security issues, and each should be dealt with separately. Debka sources propose that rather than the Israeli Air Force initiating action following Palestinian aggression, the airstrikes should attack the military infrastructure of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist groups systematically without prior notice in the way that Israel engages Iranian facilities in Syria. According to the head of the Eshkol District Council, Gadi Yarkoni, The terror kites, which are destroying Israel's farms, should be treated as terrorism. The perpetrators need to be stopped, and the facilities producing the kites must be destroyed. Debka military experts propose that the IDF takes the following steps to counter the Hamas terror that has escalated over the past 3 months. First, the IDF should incorporate surprise attacks and should not boast about its restraint in the face of Palestinian attacks. Hamas views this as a sign of weakness. The IDF should adopt a proactive policy that distinguishes between the threat from Gaza and the distressed population. The territory's humanitarian crisis should not be addressed as a way to solve the numerous security issues, and each should be dealt with separately. Debka sources propose that rather than the Israeli Air Force initiating action following Palestinian aggression, the airstrike should attack the military infrastructures of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist groups systematically without prior notice in the way that Israel engages Iranian facilities in Syria. According to the head of the Eshkol District Council, Gadi Yarkoni, the terror kites, which are destroying Israeli farms, should be treated as terrorism. The perpetrators need to be stopped, and the facilities producing the kites must be destroyed. The Egyptian General Intelligence are unreliable in regards to stopping Palestinian terror. Since withdrawing from the territory in 2007, Israel is not responsible for the well-being of the Palestinians, but rather it should be in the hands of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. If Israel chooses to partake in alleviating the living conditions for Gazans, the most effective way would be to establish an international committee with representatives from several European countries and Arab governments, such as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE. For years, when Israel transferred to Gaza essential products for the general population, the fuel, building materials, food, and medicine were confiscated by Hamas and transferred to its armed wing, the Ez ad-Din al-Qassam. Other goods were sent to shops and sold for cash. Joining us to discuss this is Dr. Martin Sherman, director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me back.
Do you think that Hamas can be defeated without a major Israeli invasion?
Well, I suppose that depends on what you mean by defeat. If you mean, can you bring Hamas to a state where it has to stop firing and launching aggression for a certain amount of time, you probably don't need an invasion. But if you're talking about a long-term solution to the problem, I'm very doubtful whether that can be achieved without Israel taking control and keeping control of the Gaza Strip. I don't think that there's any solution. There's no way that you can determine who will come after Hamas. If the goal is to dislodge and displace Hamas, then you need to answer who's going to come after Hamas. And the only way that you can control who's going to come after Hamas is for Israel to govern the territory. And the real answer down the line, and this might sound a bit radical, but the real answer down the line is not the reconstruction of Gaza, but the deconstruction of Gaza. You know, if you look at what's happened in Gaza since Israel left in 2005, I don't believe that anyone had envisioned this then would have gone ahead with this engagement. You know, and every time there's a threat, we come up with an answer, and then there's a new threat. We had intruders, so we put up a fence. Then they had rockets to overcome the fence, so we've had the Iron Dome. Then they decided to have tunnels, so we're now building a subterranean barrier 120 feet underground. And so now they've developed kites and drones. And I think it's only a matter of time until we find a drone with a non-conventional, either chemical or biological load on it, aimed at some Israeli community. So I don't think that it's possible to defeat the Hamas, or even really advisable to defeat the Hamas unless you know what's going to come afterwards. And I believe the only way is to roll back the mistake of leaving Gaza and to sort of cash in the check that Yitzhak Rabin once gave, and he said everything is reversible. I think it's time to reverse.
Debka suggests that there are 10 steps for the IDF to defeat Gaza. What do you think about these strategies? Well,
I agree with some of them, like Israel should take the initiative and it should not make restraint as its operational banner. I think that Israel should engage in unconstrained attacks, unmitigated attacks on Gaza. And also I think it's a bit of a mistake to try and exonerate the general population, because the population in Gaza is not the victim of its current leadership. It's the crucible from which that leadership emerged and in which it was formed. And basically, the Gazan society as a cruel, brutal society reflects the leadership. And if you remove Hamas, those societal characteristics will reflect themselves again and produce a leadership which is either similar or worse.
We just heard Nikki Haley and Danny Danon speaking at the UN in regard to the Gaza terror instigated by Hamas. Do you believe they're having an influence on the anti-Israeli positions in international organizations?
Well, it's always good to have representatives like Nikki Haley rather than her predecessors. But I don't think that Israel can base its public diplomacy effort on specific individuals. As I say, Nikki Haley is great, but I think Israel needs to launch a far wider and more multifaceted assault on public opinion. For years, I've been advocating that Israel devote 1% of its state budget to public diplomacy. That's well over $1 billion today. With $1 billion, you can change a lot of minds and win a lot of hearts. So I don't really think that the positions expressed in international organizations reflect the truth. I think they reflect interests, and the only way to change that is to focus on changing the context in which events are perceived.
That's Dr. Martin Sherman. Thank you very much for your insight today.
Thank you.
The Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem issued a statement on Saturday that denied any media reports stating that Israel and Russia had come to terms with Iranian forces in Syria. Israel says no agreement has been made and continues to demand the evacuation of all Iranian forces in Syria. Debka file sources report that on Thursday, progress had been made during a phone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Russian President Putin, but there were no final agreements. Debka file exclusive reports that despite the opposite claims from media sources, Syrian, Iranian, and Hezbollah forces were indeed moving into southern Syria on Friday, opposite the Jordanian and Israeli borders. Russian President Putin presented a proposal for their removal to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu presented the plan to Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman. Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov said that only Syrian troops should have a presence on Syria's southern border.
Изначально договоренность о создании на юго-западе Сирии зоны деэскалации предполагала эвентуальный отвод всех несирийских сил из этой части Сирийской Арабской Республики. Итогом всей этой работы, которая должна продолжаться и продолжается, должна стать ситуацией, когда на границе Сирии с Израилем с сирийской стороны будут стоять представители вооруженных сил Сирийской Арабской Республики.
The Raqqa refugee camp is where the U.S. trains and equips armed Syrian opposition forces and sends them to eastern and southern Syria. Washington did not respond to Lavrov's comments. However, Netanyahu challenged him immediately, stating that the Iranian military does not belong in Syria, and if they do not vacate, Israel will continue its military attacks. Last Tuesday, Netanyahu told his cabinet that the campaign against Iranian aggression had not ended. We are working to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, against Iran's consolidated military presence against us, and operating against the transfer of deadly weapons from Syria to Lebanon or their manufacture in Lebanon. Debka military sources report that Netanyahu warned that Tehran's ballistic missiles and weapons in Syria and Lebanon are at risk, and if Iran continues importing them, they would be destroyed. Israel refuses to accept that Iran and Hezbollah could spread their missiles across Syria and Lebanon. Prior to Lieberman arriving in Moscow on Thursday, Iranian and Hezbollah forces expanded into 3 strategic locations facing Israel's Golan border. Hezbollah troops disguised in Syrian army uniforms appeared to follow Lavrov's instructions that only Syrian government forces can stand on the Israeli border. Lieberman was joined by military intelligence chief Major General Tamir Heineman and Defense Minister Senior Security Advisor Zohar Palti. The talks were urgent as the Iranian Hezbollah forces had been advancing on the Kenitra region. The forces, disguised in Syrian uniforms, took up positions on the hills surrounding the Syrian Golan town, then divided into sections. One section pulled back to the division base at Katana between Kenitra and Damascus, and another group branched north to the village of Hadar opposite the IDF's Mount Hermon outpost. From Hadar and the surrounding villages, Hezbollah has a close-up view of the surveillance of Israel's Golan outposts and border defenses. All forces are preparing to launch an offensive to take Quneitra from the Syrian rebel militias holding the town across from the Israeli border. If U.S. President Trump decides that the IDF can handle the Iranian threat on its northern border, Quneitra could soon be a new focal point for the escalating tensions between Iran and Israel. Last Tuesday, Iran announced that the supreme ruler, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has replaced General Farzad Ismail, the commander of the Khatam al-Anbiya Air Defense Headquarters, with Brigadier General Alireza Sabahi Fard as acting commander. This replacement came just days after reports that a pair of Israeli F-35 stealth planes had entered Iran's airspace. The fired commander Ismail was recently one of Iran's most esteemed generals, in charge of Iran's missile units and conventional air and missile defense weapon systems, as well as the air defense at the secret nuclear sites and enrichment facilities. In addition, he oversaw the fleet of drones based on Iran and Syria and the National Missile Program's development infrastructure. According to Debka sources, Khamenei fired the general after the F-35 flights over Iran's nuclear sites went unopposed, as well as the Israeli airstrikes hitting Iranian military targets in Syria. Israeli Air Force Chief Major General Amikam Nurkin unveiled knowledge of a series of successful attacks on Iranian targets in Syria, as well as an Israeli F-35 stealth plane over Beirut. The new commander has spent 33 years working in the Iranian air and missile defense system industry. The U.S. Congress is trying to prevent Turkey from receiving the advanced F-35 stealth fighter on June 21st. On May 25th, the House of Representatives passed a bill which blocked the U.S. Defense Secretary's ability to approve the sale to Ankara. Turkey has plans to order at least 100 F-35 jets. Many U.S. lawmakers view Turkey as having goals that are opposed to U.S. national security interests. The White House, State Department, and Pentagon hope to replace Erdogan with a different leader. Erdogan was the first NATO member to purchase weapons from Russia when he signed the S-400 air defense missile contract with Moscow. He also colludes with Tehran for busting U.S. sanctions and attacking Israel. He orders American citizens to be thrown in jail, such as Pastor Andrew Brunson, who attends the church of U.S. Vice President Mike Pence. He uses arrested Americans to bargain the extradition of the exiled Turkish Muslim cleric Fethullah Gulen, who tried to plot against him in June of 2016. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced to U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee that the U.S. is trying to prevent Turkey from acquiring the S-400. Today, Pompeo will meet with Turkish Foreign Minister Cavusoglu, who has stated, quote, "This is a substantial legal agreement that includes the joint production of some materials. We've made our payments regularly, and this has nothing to do with our procurement of S-400s. A Turkish media outlet reported that Ankara could purchase Russian Su-57 jets, which are a strong alternative if the sale for F-35s is prevented. Debka intelligence sources report that Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Greece are trying to convince Pompeo, Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, and National Security Advisor John Bolton to stop the sale. Israel has warned that the advanced F-35 fighters could eventually get into Iranian hands as a result of the military and intelligence pacts between Ankara and Tehran. The Saudis fear that the U.S. stealth plane would allow Turkey's Air Force a way to reach the Red Sea area, where it now has sea and air bases in Sudan, Qatar, and Somalia. Last week, Russian Defense Minister General Sergei Shoigu tried to facilitate the plane's sale to Turkey. Military sources in Damascus claim that an attack had occurred against targets in the northern Hama region. Moscow used this as proof that the Su-57 was ready to go into immediate service. If Erdogan purchases the Russian fighter, Turkey will acquire its second Russian weapon system while a member of NATO. Washington must now decide where it stands regarding Turkey and its future. And now for a roundup of this week's regional stories, the news in brief. The new app GalaPro, developed by the Israel-based startup Galaprompter, provides smartphone users with multilingual subtitles, dubbing, and amplification services during theater performances, giving theater goers who are vision impaired, hearing impaired, or who don't speak fluent English the opportunity to understand what's happening on stage. Herzliya-based CEO Yonat Berlin stated that culture connects people globally and that this app makes theater accessible and open to everybody. The app will be implemented in all Broadway theaters by the end of the year and can already be used at many Broadway shows. The upcoming Tony Awards will also feature the app, allowing people who are visually or hearing impaired to enjoy the show. The maker of the F-35 stealth fighter jet, Lockheed Martin, will be opening a science and technology-focused preschool in Jerusalem. The school will be part of the company's network of schools called Modern Kids, which runs educational programs for preschoolers in kindergarten and nursery school in Beersheba and Kiryat Malachai. The preschool will be located in the southwest neighborhood of Kiryat Menachem and will run in cooperation with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Ministry of Jerusalem Affairs and Heritage, and the Jerusalem Municipality, and will open in September. The school will be part of the secular state school system and will include science and technology stations to encourage creativity and scientific thinking. Lockheed Martin runs several education programs around the world, but this initiative is unique to Israel. Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat celebrated the program, calling Jerusalem, quote, the capital of educational innovation. Jerusalem Affairs and Heritage Minister Ze'ev Elkin said he was excited that Jerusalem is becoming a center for scientific activity. The Hebrew University in Jerusalem is now ranked in the top 100 universities, according to a survey by the Times Higher Education World Reputation Rankings in 2018. This is the first time in 4 years that an Israeli university made it onto the list. Hebrew University President Asher Cohen said, quote, to be judged among the top 100 most powerful university brands is a great source of pride for everyone at Hebrew University and for Israel as a whole. Success in our field is never an accident. It is achieved by a relentless pursuit of excellence, creativity, and a deep commitment to our enduring values. The rankings are based on invitation-only surveys with published academics who are asked to name up to 15 universities that they believe are the best for research and teaching in their field. That's it for this week's edition of the Debka File. We'll be back with you next week with all the exclusive news, insight, and analysis from the Middle East. Thanks for watching.